The movie begins with a news anchor revealing that the world-famous author, Harrington Davis, whose Magic and Mistletoe book series had taken the world up by storm, actually hates Christmas himself. Despite writing a globally beloved Christmas book series, Harrington turned out to be the Grinch in real life. Not only does he find Christmas disinteresting, but he also calls it a capitalist joke. As a result, his fans get enraged and blame his fame and fortune for the blatant ignorance and disrespect. Because of this, Harrington had been forced to hide from the public eye, and also postpone the release of the last installment of his Magic and Mistletoe series. The scene now cuts to a young woman named April, who actually turns out to be Harrington's book agent, looking at all the social media hate posts aimed towards Harrington and his book. She continues scrolling through multiple posts, and comes to the realization that the situation is extremely messed up. Just as she's trying to calm herself down, she gets a call from Mallory, her boss, asking her to control the damage as much as possible. April replies that she's going to try her best, and then hangs up. Moments later, April and all the other employees are summoned for an emergency meeting, where Mallory tells them that they've already promoted Harrington's upcoming book in hundreds of bookstores. She then states that if his image isn't redeemed in time, they might suffer a huge loss. After Mallory's initial statement, April stands up and tells the team that they now have to convince Harrington to retract his statements and do an apology tour. She then asserts that in order to make things right, the now hated writer will have to apologize at the annual Mistletoe Christmas Festival. Eventually, April explains that she'll somehow convince Harrington to appear as a chief guest at the festival so that his fans get to hear him up close and personal. Shortly after, April exits her office and gets ready to board an emergency flight. She calls up her mother and apologetically tells her that she won't be joining in for Christmas anymore, as she now has to clean Harrington's mess up. After a short conversation, she bids her mom goodbye and starts thinking of a way to approach Harrington. The scene now shifts to a very stressed and anxious-looking Harrington, who is now hated by the entire world. But despite the nasty stares from everyone around him, he thinks that this sticky situation will just simmer down. Just as he's getting coffee from a small shop nearby, he runs into April. She isn't sure how to approach him, so she just asks for his autograph and strikes up a small conversation. She then introduces herself as the PR agent of his publishing agency. Harrington immediately realizes what this is all about, so he asks her what she wants. April tries to tell him about his worsening reputation, but Harrington simply ignores her. He tells her that everyone will slowly forget about what he said. April scoffs at that and informs him that Christmas is in 10 days, and if people continue hating him, they will all suffer a huge loss. Furthermore, millions of his loyal fans will not believe in him anymore. Harrington simply laughs at that, but April remains serious. Whilst getting annoyed, she tells him that a single ill-advised post of his will ruin Christmas for myriads of people this year. But much to her dismay, Harrington refuses to listen to a word she says and stands by his claim. He even goes on to call Christmas a scam and just a way to get easy money. Now infuriated, April urges Harrington to think of his fans and asks him to go to his hometown for the Mistletoe Christmas Festival. She requests him to apologize and talk to all his fans personally. As expected, Harrington hates the idea. He instantly refuses to do so, and even states that he isn't going to apologize for something that he truly stands by. As a result, a very enraged April tells him that if he doesn't go back to Mistletoe for the festival, her company will sue him to no end. Harrington tries to retort, but April simply ignores him and storms out of the place. A couple of days later, April arrives at Mistletoe and goes straight to the mayor to discuss more about the upcoming Christmas festival. During their conversation, the mayor thanks her for inviting Harrington to their event and talks about how excited everyone is. April gladly nods at that and informs her that Harrington will arrive in the town really soon. Shortly after, April calls Mallory and tells her that everything is going according to plan. She then drives to Harrington's childhood home, where his old friend Chris greets her excitedly. After introducing himself, Chris tells her that Harrington actually donated his home to the town, so they turned it into the magical Mistletoe Museum. It's evident just how much his book evolved the whole world. Moving forward, Chris says that he looks after the museum and also stays there sometimes to maintain it. April nods her head in understanding and asks him if Harrington has arrived. Chris replies that he doesn't know, and when they enter the museum, they don't see any of his bags. April starts to panic, so Chris immediately rushes upstairs to see if Harrington has arrived. Meanwhile, April looks around herself to see if she can find the grumpy author. Just as she's about to lose all hope, she spots him walking out of the kitchen. Now relieved, she asks him if he's okay. Harrington begrudgingly replies that he is, and then asks her to go away, as he doesn't need anyone to monitor him. April, however, refuses to do so as she is tasked to make sure that he attends the festival without any tantrums. A while later, April and Harrington discuss their itinerary for the upcoming days. At one point, Harrington exclaims that he will only be attending 3 events and no more than that. April agrees to the offer and then asks him if he'll be attending the mayor's kickoff party for the volunteers. Harrington states that he just wants to rest, so April respects his wishes. Shortly after, April walks out of the museum and checks into a small hotel in the middle of the town. The owners there cheerily greet her and tell her just how much Harrington means to them. They explain that it's because of him that their hotel is still in business. April is glad to hear that and congratulates them for their success. She is then escorted to her room where she happily settles in. Sometime later, she goes to the mayor's Christmas kickoff party. There, she informs the mayor that Harrington wants to rest so that he can be ready for the mistletoe festival. Harrington understands the situation and thus asks her to enjoy herself at the party. Moments later, April heads towards the bar to get herself a drink, and that's where she bumps into Lindsay, an old friend of Harrington. The two quickly introduce themselves and, while sipping their drinks, talk about their work and hobbies. At one point, Lindsay tells April that she and Harrington used to be the best of friends. However, they slowly lost contact. April simply nods at that and then asks Lindsay for some more information about Harrington so that she can warm up to him. In response to that, Lindsay asks her to always remain straightforward and truthful to him, since that's the only way to break his shell. Soon after, April, along with Lindsay and all the other guests, make a Christmas wish and decorate the Christmas tree present there with gorgeous ornaments. After a long night of having fun, she finally returns back to the hotel. The next morning, April returns back to Harrington's place to pick him up for an event. She waits for him for quite a while, and soon after, the two drive away. Whilst driving, April tells Harrington that the town is truly magical, and everyone there is really nice. Harrington, however, disagrees with her and states that everything is just a gimmick now. April doesn't know how to reply to that, so she just starts giving him tips on how to speak at a panel. She then begs him not to mention his social media posts at all. Despite her continuous rambling, Harrington makes up his mind to just do whatever he wants. This really annoys April, so she starts taunting Harrington and even calls him a sullen author who's way over his head. As a result, the two begin arguing even before reaching their destination. After what seems like an eternity, the two of them finally reach the town hall. There they watch as a group of children happily sing Christmas songs whilst also promoting Harrington's new book. Both of them then go backstage where they greet the mayor and all of Harrington's old friends. They all chat for quite a while before heading back to the main stage for a quick Q&A. As Harrington walks onto the stage, the entire audience cheers loudly and claps for him. He then sits down across from Lance, who's not only the host, but also his childhood friend. Moving forward, Lance asks Harrington a series of questions about his inspirations and motivations that led him to create such a magical book series. Harrington answers some of the questions truthfully. However, he does get quite sarcastic and mean every once in a while. Thankfully, the audience doesn't mind that and eagerly watches him answer all of Lance's questions. Towards the end of the discussion, a small girl dressed up as a princess fairy asks Harrington a question. He sincerely answers her query and even compliments her for dressing up so nicely. Needless to say, the little girl beams with joy and thanks him for his kind words. Later that day, a very relieved April thanked Harrington for not throwing any tantrums in the middle of the panel conversation. She then apologizes to him for being so harsh earlier. He forgives her right away and thanks her instead for helping him see the bigger picture. Soon the two start joking and even start to warm up to each other. Soon after, April calls her mom and tells her all about Harrington's salty attitude. In response, her mother urges to remind him of why he first started writing the book series. April really likes the advice, so she decides to roll with it. That very night, April walks into a nearby bakery and buys a whole lot of confectionery goods for Harrington. She then goes over to his house and gives him those as a sign of thank you. Now surprised, Harrington thanks her for the gift and asks her to sit down and chat for a while. She readily agrees. Soon, the two start a small fire and make s'mores to enjoy. Just as the two are talking, April, just out of the blue, asks Harrington as to why he now hates Christmas so much. She even asks him to tell her the reason behind his nasty social media posts. After thinking for a while, Harrington explains that despite loving Christmas, he soon realized that the festival just lost its true essence. He asserts that now his hometown is just a tourist attraction, and all the people that he knows use him and his stories to promote their business. April quietly nods her head in understanding, and then assures him that the townspeople just love him a lot. Harrington simply shrugs at that and decides to change the topic. he takes April to his office and shows her a small journal that apparently his mother had given to him. Now excited, he tells her that all the ideas he's ever had are in the journal itself. As he flips through the pages of the journal, April gasps in awe and eagerly looks at every single detail in the notebook. After bonding for quite a while, April and Harrington begin to open up to each other. Harrington thus quickly realizes that April isn't as bad as he thought, and even April comes to learn that Harrington isn't a mean person. Eventually, April decides to come forward with the truth and reveals to Harrington that her publishing company would never actually sue him. She explains that doing so would only paint their company in a negative light, causing people to assume that they're just vindictive and petty. Harrington realizes that he'd been lied to and doesn't know how to react. Infuriated, he asks her to leave his house immediately. April tries to explain further, but Harrington suddenly blows up on her. He accuses her of tricking him into doing something that he absolutely despises. After realizing what she had done, April profusely apologizes to Harrington and exclaims that she was incredibly wrong for misleading him. He, however, refuses to hear her out. Eventually, after a long while of trying, April gives up and begs Harrington to just tolerate her for a couple of days so that they can go back to their lives as soon as possible. She then assures him that she'll not lie to him ever again. Upon hearing this, Harrington finally cools down and decides to stay back just for the sake of his upcoming book. The next morning, April and Harrington meet up again for some more events. Instead of driving, the two decide to walk to their destination so that they can enjoy the Christmas atmosphere around them. Harrington even offers to give April a tour of his hometown since the place is new to her. Whilst doing so, he tells her that ever since his books gained popularity, Christmas has become all about profit and tourists. In response, April tells him that the people in his hometown are just grateful to him and that he should realize the impact he's had on everyone. As soon as she says that, a massive group of teenagers and kids swarm Harrington and ask for his autograph. The crowd starts to get larger and larger, so April immediately drags him away, and the two then hurriedly get into Chris's car. Shortly after, they reach the town's theater to attend the annual Christmas bake-off. After welcoming everyone to the event, Lance invites April to say a few words. She excitedly walks to the center stage and announces that the winner of the event will receive a cash prize of $5,000. Not just that, they would also receive lots of free goodies. Upon hearing this, the entire audience clapped loudly and even started cheering for their favorite participant. Shortly after, Harrington wishes all the best to the participants and announces the commencement of the event. The contestants start baking right away and create delicious treats for the holidays. After a while, time runs out, so Harrington, being the judge, walks to the stage and tastes all the different desserts. Unable to make a decision, he calls upon Bree, who happens to be Lindsay's daughter, to help him with choosing the winner. Bree immediately runs to the stage and tastes all the treats excitedly. She then gives her verdict to Harrington. Eventually, the two of them make the final decision and announce the winner of the event. Later, Harrington and April head to a hotel to attend a small press event. The two quickly enter the place and invite all the reporters and guests to ask whatever question they want to. In order to make the event even better, the hotel owners, Sue and Marcus, make a batch of delicious snacks for everyone to munch on. Soon after, Harrington starts answering the questions put forward to him. Despite warning the reporters to not ask about his social media posts, some of them urge him to give a clarification for the situation. Afraid that Harrington might walk out, April tries to divert the topic. However, Harrington happily agrees to give an explanation. He states that all his statements were made without proper judgments. Furthermore, he exclaims that not only was his social media post selfish, it was also thoughtless and reckless. He even goes on to apologize for hurting people's sentiments and announces that Christmas means the absolute world to him. When April sees Harrington's attitude change for the better, she breathes a sigh of relief and rejoices at the fact that the bitter author she once knew is now full of gratitude and happiness. The following morning, a very jolly Harrington goes to the town's bakery and buys a lot of desserts. As soon as he reaches home, he is greeted by April, who informs him that the press event has really helped salvage his reputation. Harrington is pleased to hear that and thanks April for all the help. He then asks her to buckle up, as the two are about to embark on an adventure. Moments later, Harrington takes April to a beautiful tree farm. There, the two walk around the snowy fields and talk about their childhood. At one point, Harrington even tells April that all the characters and scenes in his books are based on real-life people and events. He explains that every single moment in his life made its way into his book. April is impressed upon hearing this and praises him for his talent. Slowly but surely, the two get really close to each other. Without even realizing it, they end up developing feelings for one another. After a long while of just roaming around, April drops Harrington off at home and informs him that they have a big day tomorrow. Harrington simply nods, smiles, and tries to walk inside. Just then, April stops him and asks him to join her for the Christmas costume dance happening that night. After pondering for a moment, Harrington readily agrees to attend the event, bids her goodbye, and walks into his house. Later that night, Harrington gets dressed into a character from his book and attends the Christmas costume dance. He looks around for quite a while, but can't find April. With nothing else to do, he starts chatting with the mayor. Just as the two are conversing, April walks into the event dressed up as the Christmas fairy. When Harrington sees her, he is struck by her beauty and falls even harder for her. After a while of just gawking at her, Harrington approaches April and tells her that she looks absolutely gorgeous. April thanks him for the compliment and then asks him to dance with her. Soon after, the two start dancing with each other and have a lot of fun. Whilst doing so, Harrington thanks April for helping him see the world in a positive way. Filled with gratitude, he tells her she's the only one who helped him realize that he's done a lot for his town, and the people there are only grateful for it. In response, April cheekily says that the only reason she ever signed up for all of this is because she's a huge fan of her books and didn't want it to suffer a nasty end. Harrington simply smiles at that and continues swaying to the slow music. That very night, April and Harrington go back to his home only to find a huge Christmas tree situated in the middle. It turns out that April had asked Chris to place Harrington's old family Christmas tree along with multiple presents in the house as a surprise for him. She expects him to get excited upon seeing his gift, but much to her dismay, his face actually turns incredibly sour. When April asks him if he's okay, Harrington gets emotional and just runs into his office. Now confused, April sadly walks out of the house and returns back to her hotel room. The next morning, April wakes up to find her mom standing at the entrance of the hotel. Unable to control her emotions, April immediately runs to her mother and hugs her tightly. Soon after, they sit down in the lobby and start chatting about what's been going on. April takes this opportunity to tell her mom about the Christmas tree incident and wonders why he'd ever react like that. In response, her mother consoles her by saying that Harrington is a sweet guy and will come around pretty quickly. Her mom also reveals that it was Harrington who flew her to town at the last minute. Needless to say, April is stunned to hear that. In the meantime, a very upset Harrington rants to Chris and Lindsay that he never wanted any Christmas tree. He then explains that it only reminds him of the loss of his parents. In response, Chris and Lindsay apologize for being inconsiderate and reveal that they were the ones who actually gave the idea to April. Harrington simply remains silent and tries to control his tears. Finally, he reveals that about 4 years ago, when he was at the peak of his career, he got so wrapped in all the fame and glory that he couldn't be with his mother during her final times. Because of this, he was crushed by guilt and decided to live a life of seclusion. Sadly, April didn't know any of this, so Harrington's reaction was surprising for her. When he realizes this, he feels like a jerk and decides to make things right. That night, the entire town of Mistletoe arrives at the town hall for the annual Mistletoe Christmas banquet. April and her mom also join in for the event. Upon realizing that Harrington isn't there, April starts to get worried. She thinks that he's still angry with her and as a result, will not attend the event. Thankfully, her mom consoles her and asks her to simply enjoy the night. Shortly after, April runs into Mallory, who has also come for the main event. As the two meet, Mallory praises April for doing such a wonderful job and thanks her for saving their publishing company. Just as they are talking, the town's mayor announces that the banquet will begin shortly and calls upon Harrington to bestow him with a very special honor. Upon hearing this, April starts panicking, but is quickly relieved when Harrington appears on stage and happily receives the award. He then begins his speech about how his book is a tribute to all his loved ones. Harrington explains that sadly, somewhere along the way, the magic of Christmas disappeared for him, which is why he never wanted to return to his hometown. But after coming back, he realized that the magic was still there, and the only reason for this was April, who practically forced him to embrace the positivity of the town. Harrington concludes his speech by thanking the entire town for their love, and then walks off stage. In front of him, April smiles with glee as she realizes that Harrington has forgiven her. She also feels happy knowing he has finally become the cheerful and cordial person he once was. A while later, Chris and Lindsay congratulate both Harrington and April for their success. They all chat together for quite a while, before heading outside to commence the lantern lighting ceremony. Whilst walking outside, Harrington approaches April and tells her that she looks gorgeous. He also apologizes for being so harsh on her. Thankfully, April forgives him right away. Moments later, April thanks the entire town of Mistletoe on behalf of her company for letting them be a part of such a beautiful ceremony. She then welcomes Harrington onto the stage, where he gladly announces the release of the final installment of his Magic in Mistletoe book series. Needless to say, the entire crowd excitedly grabs the books and gets ready to light their lanterns. Harrington inaugurates the ceremony by lighting the first lantern, and then, everyone in the audience follows suit. Soon enough, the entire sky is covered with beautiful lanterns. After the lantern lighting ceremony, Harrington asks April to close her eyes and takes her to a mysterious place for a surprise. The two walk for quite a while before sitting down on a bench. April then slowly opens her sight to find the most breathtaking scene before her. Awestruck, she looks at the sky filled with beautiful lanterns. At that moment, Harrington explains that about 12 years ago on Christmas Eve, he saw the sky light up with lanterns as well, and that's when he first got the idea to write Magic in Mistletoe. He further explains that the lanterns themselves are the inspiration behind his most popular character, the Christmas fairy. April, who is a huge fan of the books herself, is shocked by this and thanks him for sharing such personal details with her. Finally, after a long while of just suppressing her feelings, April tells Harrington that she really likes him. Harrington reveals that he has feelings for her as well, and even asserts that she's the magic he's been searching for all his life. The movie finally ends with the two kissing and starting a new chapter of their lives together.